Okay, so Luke, in this show, what we're going to do is we are going to continue the theme that we started last week, talking with Ken Larkin about hopelessness. And again, maybe some guys are hopeless because they've grown up in the church, they've heard all the promises of the gospel and the power of Jesus to save, but they're not experiencing it in their own life. And I think that probably everyone who was listening to our last show could identify with some of the barriers that we talked about last time. But maybe they need something more than just understanding which barrier or barriers would pertain to them. Maybe they need strong encouragement to take a specific action toward freedom. So that's what I want to focus on in this episode. I've got 5 specific actions lined up that I want to talk about. I want you to explain why each of those actions are going to be crucial for finding freedom God's way. So the first thing I've got on my list is confession. And we've all had to confess. Anyone who's in sexual sin has had to confess at some level, and we get it. It's terrifying. There's a very real chance that our confession is going to set a series of events in motion that could end up with the loss of something really valuable to us. But I don't want to talk about the negative piece. I want to talk about why confession is crucial to finding freedom.
Sure, and I agree with you, and I want to just add to something you said there, because when you said anyone who is in sexual sin has had to confess, and it's really more like anyone who's living in victory from sexual sin has had to confess.
Yeah, that's good.
Because, I mean, I lived in sexual sin for almost 2 decades without confession and very little victory. But it's true across the board that anybody who is currently living a life of victory in sexual sin has had to confess. It is critical. But one of the things is that we have to kind of understand is that when we're not confessing our sins, we're living in darkness. And that's something that I had to probably realize before coming here, because I remember having these discussions even with my brother one time, and he was like, why don't you come to our men's group and, we just kind of confess some struggles. And I'm like, I don't need to confess that, I don't need to confess my struggles. And he was emphasizing again, no, it really is important. And his own testimony was just how I found freedom. And I was like, I don't really think that's necessary. But when we're living in darkness, that is sin. Like that, there is a problem with that, and we have to equate the two. We have to equate living in darkness with living in sin, and I think Jesus does a good job of that in John 3 when he talks about the light and the darkness. And let me just read some of those verses.
Okay.
And starting in verse 19, and this is the judgment: the light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. So right there we see that there's a connection between darkness and evil works. Okay. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light. It's like, wait a minute. Okay, so now we're equating doing evil things with hating light, and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. So you see that, like, when the Bible's talking about living in darkness or darkness and light not having this fellowship, they're talking about sin. It's talking about sin. And we have to realize that when I'm living in darkness, or when I'm living in unconfessed sin, I'm living in darkness. And Jesus finishes that statement by saying, whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. And so for me, that was very important to realize that, okay, it's not that I'm just trying to keep something hidden or trying to work something out on my own. It's actually, I'm holding on to sin, and I'm choosing to keep it hidden and not come to the light. And that in itself is sin.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really helpful, because what you're saying is that the sin that we want to cover is itself an act of sin. So now we've got two sins that we're dealing with, right? We've got the actual sexual sin, and then we've got this choice to cover it and live in darkness.
Yeah, yes.
Let's talk about surrender. You've been counseling for quite a while now, and I'm sure you've come across situations where a person is feeling convicted about some area of their life.
Sure.
And they're resisting that conviction. And because of that, they just can't really find the strength to deny and resist the temptations in the area of sexual sin. But then as soon as they just, okay, I'll give in to the Lord, I'll do what he's saying.
Sure.
Now there's this new power. There's this new ability to resist temptation in the area of sexual sin. Why does that happen?
Yes, it almost relates a little bit to the living in the light, because when we're picking, well, first of all, the foundation that when we're hiding a bunch of sin, right? That's the person that I was, so I could relate to that, where I'm hiding a bunch of sin, and when I want to have control of how much I'm admitting, how much I'm confessing, how much I'm bringing into the light, I'm kind of like, okay, you could have this card, and you could have this card, and, I'm keeping control of it. And then it kind of, they're connected because, well, you can't live in darkness and have freedom. So the Lord's like, you have to lay down all your cards. But if I really do that, that's always the debate. Like, okay, but if I really do that, things are going to happen in my life that are outside of my control. Like, things aren't going to go the way I want them to go. Like, right now, I kind of could manage this, at least outwardly. I can manage this sin. And if I just let everything out, then, now I'm going to have consequences that are outside of my control, But I remember one of the first sessions that I had with my counselor here in the residential program, he said, your best thinking got you here. And I had to realize that after 2 decades of fighting and trying everything and going to the weekends, the power retreats and reading the books and doing the fasting and trying accountability and all of the things that I tried in the past, I had to eventually come to the place where I don't have the answers to my problems. And so someone is going to have to walk me out of this. Well, that won't work if I keep fighting the person who's trying to help me. I just have to let it go and let the Lord do his work. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is, we all know it probably, but it's where it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge the Lord, then he will direct your paths. We have to do that. We have to stop relying on our own understanding. For so many years, we did what was right in our own eyes. It's another proverb, right? But always led to death. So eventually, we just have to come to the desperation or the willingness to be like, okay, I'm done trying to figure this out, whatever it takes.
Right.
I'm going to do.
Yeah. It is interesting sometimes when you try to help a person and you just give him something really simple.
Sure.
And he's like, why do I have to do that?
Yeah.
And so then you start to realize, okay, there's something inside the heart that's expressing itself right now, and you can start to see how maybe that reaction is kind of that way toward God as well. When he says, this is how I want you to live, it's like, why do I have to do that? And then wondering, why am I still in sexual sin?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it's Watchman who says, we can't speed up God's process, but we could certainly slow it down. And it is a joy to work with a guy who's just willing to do what he's told and willing to just admit what we're trying to show him, walk him through things. He will have a breakthrough and early victory in his time in the program because he's hungry and he's willing and he's teachable, like you were saying. But the guy who's going to wrestle and argue with you, it's just like well, then what are you here for? Like,
Yeah, right.
this isn't going to work.
Right, right. Let's talk about taking a step of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And, in my own life, sometimes what I've found is that I can do all the right things, quote unquote, but sometimes my mindset is unbelieving. It's like
Sure.
I'm praying, I'm fasting,
Mm-hmm.
I'm A, B, C, X, Y, and Z, but inside my heart is just saying, oh, this probably isn't going to work, or whatever it might be. And then there's this switch that happens where I say, you know what? I am going to believe the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to believe him. And sometimes it's like that's the thing that God was waiting for. Not all the actions, but this inward
Mm-hmm.
clinging and trust in him. Why is that so crucial for finding victory?
Yeah, I think primarily because the Lord wants to receive all the victory. And I find that in my own life, I tried all those things like you're saying, and for
Right.
years and years and years, and tried and tried and tried. And if any of those would have worked, then I would have said, this is how you do it.
Right.
You do this, and then you'll find victory, and just try really hard to make sure you do such and such, whatever it is. And the Lord would have been like, okay, great. Like, he figured it out without me. What I had to learn when I came to Pure Life was that I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the reality of the situation is I couldn't. And that's what the Lord had to build in me, that poverty of spirit that was like, well, yes, with you it is impossible. Like with man it's impossible,
Mm-hmm.
but with me it's not. And you need to realize that, and you need to believe that. And if you're going to try to fight with me for glory, it's not going to work then.
Yeah.
Fine, you'll keep trying and doing all your right things, but you're just trying to do it to get praise and trying to get the glory out of it. And the Lord's like, no, I want all the glory. So you need to come to the absolute end of yourself. And while that may sound like despairing or hopeless, if we would really just stop thinking and trying, the Lord would meet us and would prove that he is victorious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my favorite Psalms is Psalm 40, that just talks about God pulling David out of the miry bog. And
Yes.
One of the things that I've read in the commentaries is that there's certain kinds of, bogs or certain kind of like environment where the more you struggle, the more you sink. And so in some way, David was so totally reliant that I'm not going to find my way out of this by trying harder. It's going to have to be just a divine act of mercy. And I love that about the Lord because I've found, it's similar to what you're saying, I've found that when I come to the end of myself, he is right there and faithfully loves me. It's just such a strange experience. But you have to go through it to find that the end of yourself doesn't mean complete defeat and utter ruin. It means like this place where God does really come to our rescue.
Yeah, and I think God loves to work in impossible situations.
Yeah.
He loves to do miracles.
Yeah.
And another thing I would add to that as well is I find that a lot of guys, and even myself, and when I look back, I want to use the excuse like, well, this is just a struggle that everybody has. There's no real victory for it. You just keep trying and just keep trying, and eventually this will go away. And it's just kind of like that hopeless despair. But the reality was like, yeah, but look, you weren't really fighting. Like, you're when someone's saying, well, it's just not working. Well, I mean, is God failing you? Like, examine your efforts here. Like, let's just be honest with ourselves and make sure that we are actually doing everything we can and not just, saying, God, take this desire from me to view porn, and then I'm going to sit in my laptop and just, surf the internet, and then, well, Lord, you didn't take it from me.
Right.
This is just hopeless.
Right.
Well, what in the world are you sitting on your laptop for, unsecured and a lonely place?
Yeah.
Like, you're not really doing everything you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to take the hard road.
Yeah, and that really leads into another thing that I wanted to talk about, which is radical amputation. First of all, what does that term mean? And then why is it crucial to finding victory?
Sure. Radical amputation is cutting off, destroying completely something. Well, Jesus, it comes from Matthew, where Jesus was saying, either pluck out your right eye, cut off your right arm. It'd be better to do that than your whole body to go to hell. That's the context. That's where we get that idea of radical amputation. And we have to be willing to say, okay, finding freedom from my sexual sin is the most important thing in my life. So I'm going to do whatever I need to do to find freedom, to include any radical decisions. A good example, just a practical example of a radical amputation would be like, I'm getting rid of my phone, or I'm getting a gab phone, or a phone that's like super locked down. Well, I don't have internet, or I don't have emails, or I can't check the weather, or I don't have a map, and it's like, how am I going to get to work? Well, what's more important right now? Like, your victory over your sexual sin, or checking emails, or so those types of decisions of saying, okay, I'm going to make a radical amputation and deal a death blow to this out of control sin in my life. Those, you keep doing those and you'll find results. That's just how it works.
Okay, let me ask you just a counseling question. Because I think Jesus's words essentially are, if something causes you to sin, then cut it off, pluck it out, right? So if it's your phone, you keep falling on your phone, it's like, get rid of the phone. If it's your laptop, if it's your job, if it's your career, if it's the places that you go for fun, if those things lead you to sin over a consistent basis, then get rid of it. Okay, so how would a person know if the situation that they are in, like, for example, a kid who's at college, and the atmosphere at college is just really overwhelming? How would he know if the solution is to just get out of college and just go back home and just get a job at McDonald's? Or if the solution is that he really needs to make some radical life decisions where he is so that he can find freedom there? I mean, is there any counsel about that?
That's a tough situation, and there's probably not an easy answer for that. But if you do what we've been talking about so far, the answer will probably become more clear. First of all, live in the light.
Okay.
So talk to your pastor, talk to your parents, let everybody know the full extent, everything that's going on, the depth, width, height, how.
Right.
Let someone needs to know, with some spiritual wisdom and authority needs to know everything that's going on. Then you surrender. What they say to do.
Okay.
Okay. Stop trying to figure it out and and write out your pros and cons and try this and that. No, that goes back to you need to surrender.
Okay.
And let them decide. And eventually the Lord says, like, He's going to direct your paths. If you're really surrendered all your ways to Him, He'll make it clear what it is that you need to amputate. Radically amputate.
Yeah. That's good. And sometimes, it is, I think, kind of a process.
Sure.
You're in this walk with the Lord, and if your heart is in the right place where you want to do what He's asking you to do,
sure, He
might start directing you, like, okay, well, don't go to this place.
Yeah.
Okay, at this time, don't be on your computer because you're more vulnerable during this time. And so there there is some of that just
Sure.
through that spiritual authority, like you're saying, where someone is helping you examine your life
Yeah.
and then following what they have to say. Yeah, I've found so much freedom in that when, even just in other areas, forget the sexual sin, but just submitting my life to someone else other than me.
Yes. 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 That's the truth. It's just like we want to do things our way, and it's just our pride getting in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a benefit of submitting ourselves to a spiritual authority that he doesn't, or she, like, cares for us. You find someone who loves you and wants the best for you.
Yeah. Last one is not allowing your feelings to dominate your life. Why is overcoming this feelings-driven life so important or crucial, I would say?
Feelings could be a huge blessing, or they could be a major curse. One thing we need to establish as a fact is we cannot trust our feelings. Okay, so while sometimes they're on point and they're good, other times they're totally off. Okay, so we can't make our feelings the basis for any decisions we make. Now, feelings are natural, and they will come, and we'll have to deal with them, and that doesn't mean that because you're getting a crazy feeling that you're in sin. No, everybody's going to deal with feelings. But making life decisions just based off of a feeling is very risky. When I think back of my life in sin, and I use the term, I used to say I was unstable in all my ways because there was just so much instability. And someone who is living a life based off of feelings is going to be unstable. Psalms 107 describes like all those different people who were in bondage or in distress, and one of them talks about the seas and they were risen up with high waves, then dumped into the valley, then up and down, and like tossed about like a wave tossed in the ocean, which also kind of like is a little bit of what James was saying in his chapter 1, where it's like being tossed to and fro, unstable in all our ways. That's emotions. They're never steady. They're never really based off of truth, off of a foundation. They're just going off of really what we see, what our senses pick up, and they're completely unreliable. So making decisions based off of emotions is just not... you're taking a significant chance because you just don't know where you're going to end up with it. And let's just be honest, like if predominantly we are living a life of a lot of sin, or we're just like falling and keep falling, we're probably not in a good place to be trusting our emotions. Most of our emotions are probably pretty perverted and twisted right now. Not a good idea.
Yeah, I've heard Pastor Steve say it like this, if you live... if you follow your feelings, right? So I feel like I want to go to a movie. I feel like I want to eat a hamburger. I feel like I want to sleep. I feel like I want to watch porn, right? So if you're just following your impulses all the time, sometimes those feelings are going to be downright sinful.
Yes.
And so if you can't live under the control of those things because... Yeah, a lot of the time those feel, I feel like I want to punch somebody. So so we're going to do that now?
Yes, and it's contrary to popular culture because so much of our, at least in our American culture right now, so much is based on what makes you feel right, what makes you feel good. I get really good vibes about this place. Or, and it's just like, okay, like you're saying, you can't just do everything you feel like doing. And I think that there's some truth when Jesus said, listen, if you want to be my disciple, the first thing you're going to have to do is deny yourself. And in some way that is going to be like what you feel is right or wrong, or what you feel you should do at that moment. You're just going to have to deny that sometimes. And it even goes back to the surrender thing. So, I don't feel like this is right, but, I've sought counsel from my pastor or my parents, and they're telling me to do this. And, I'm just going to have to stop relying on my feelings and my understandings and really trust someone else right now. And that's much more safe, for sure.
Yeah, because like you said, I mean, your best thinking...
Yeah.
Like you said earlier, your best thinking got you to pure life. I think for other people, they could say my best feelings got me to pure life. It's just I was led by my impulses. And what did it do? It just, for a lot of people, it is destroying their lives. And I think this is really good, everything that you've said, because basically you're giving these guys or these ladies a kind of a life that is not the status quo. They haven't been living in the light, maybe. They haven't been living in surrender. They haven't been just living in faith. They haven't been living not by feelings but by truth. And so you're giving people some really solid just encouragement to live a different kind of a life than they've lived in the past with the Lord's help. So is there anything else that you had to share, kind of off script?
Sure. One of the things, even as you were just describing all those things, by themselves, if you could live in the light, surrender, not base your life off of feelings, and really be radical and willing to do whatever it takes, you could do all those things, but you could begin to create a religion out of those almost. And it could just become a checklist where it's like, hey, I confessed, and I told my accountability partner I would do whatever it took. And I went to Pure Life and nothing changed. And, I was willing to do the radical thing and see, obviously, and, it's just like, okay, it all comes down to a spiritual issue. And if we don't deal with this as this is a heart issue between me and the Lord. The reason I'm acting the way I'm acting is because something's off with me and God. In Galatians 5, when Paul says, if you live by the Spirit, you will not fulfill the lust and the desires of your flesh. We have to take that as a true statement and evaluate our lives in honesty. If I'm fulfilling the lust and the desires of my flesh, which are listed all in there, then I'm not walking by the Spirit in one area of my life. And I need to go before the Lord and deal with this as a spiritual issue. If I don't, then all I'm going to be doing is dealing with outward stuff for the rest of my life. And you'll never have lasting victory or even real change. And like you said earlier, forget about sexual sin. That's just one aspect of a much larger picture. The Lord wants to do a mighty work through us. Like we're created in His image to be, mercy doers on this earth. There's unsaved people that need our help. And so, we need to get, never mind just the sexual sin out of our life, we need to lay down our life and serve the Lord. And if we can kind of picture the reason I'm struggling with sexual sin is because I'm not willing to do whatever it takes to follow Jesus. Oh, yeah, living in the light, surrender, radical. Those are all things, never mind the sex addict has to deal with. Everybody has to do those things if they want to be a disciple of Jesus,
Good.
So it's like we need to get this in focus and realize that it's not all about me and my sexual sin. This is about a relationship with the Lord that He wants to have with me in my inner man so that I could be used by Him mightily in this world. That's my goal, not just victory from sexual sin.
Yeah. Yeah, man, this is so good. And I would just encourage anybody who's listening to this who wants more of this sort of teaching. We've got a number of different series on our podcast. We've got our What Role series. We've got the Church Addicted series. We've got the 20 Truths series. We've got the Victory series. Just a lot of different series about what it means to live a true Christian life.
Sure.
Right? And just kind of expanding our our thinking, not just how do I get rid of this one area of my life, but how do I live as a true disciple. So yeah, thanks very much, Luke. This is very good.
Man, no problem. Thank you.